The Liberal government announced a drastic cut to its immigration targets this week, a significant reversal from its plan announced just a year ago. Canada was expected to admit about 500,000 permanent residents in both 2025 and 2026. But under this new plan, those numbers have been slashed to 395,000 next year and 380,000 in 2026, with plans for that level to continue to drop into 2027. The temporary population is also going to drop under this plan. In 25 and 26, Ottawa will decrease the number of temporary workers by more than 445,000 people each year. Overall, these sweeping changes will lead to an overall population decline of 0.2%. That's about 80,000 fewer people in Canada. Immigration Minister Mark Miller spoke to Power and Politics about the changes yesterday.
We own the fact that we didn't get the mix right. That isn't to criticize the quality of the immigrants that have come to this country. The skills that we require and the points that we require for people to become permanent residents is something that is not easy, and it is selective. Permanent residency is something that is hard to get, so too Canadian citizenship. It should remain so, but it also needs to be tailored towards the needs of the economy and factor in the impact that that can have on things like affordability, on things specifically like housing.
Rebecca Young is an economist with Scotiabank, and Mikhail Skuderud is an economics professor at the University of Waterloo. It's good to see you both. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me, David.
Rebecca Young, they pressed the accelerator on immigration a couple of years ago, and now they're slamming pretty hard on the brakes. I mean, what do you make of these sweeping changes and the implications of this reversal here?
Well, I think you categorize it correctly, that there was general consensus ahead of today's announcements, or yesterday's announcements, apologies, that we were certainly going just too hot on the accelerator on population growth last year. So that no doubt there was consensus we needed to slow down. But essentially what we saw is like the government slamming on the brakes, or at least saying they're going to slam on the brakes. So I think overall we've gone from too hot to possibly too cold very quickly.
Okay, so Mikhail, we're not hitting that Goldilocks moment of getting it just right. You know, because it's not just a slowdown. This has been driving economic growth and population growth, and now this is intended, or the consequence of it will be actual population decline. What do you make of this?
I agree with Rebecca. I think there is some reason for sure for concern that they have overcorrected here. And so then you ask yourself, well, why are they doing that? Why haven't they sort of moved towards this sweet spot that we think is probably population growth of about 0.8% a year? I think it's basically politics, and I'm an economist, so I hesitate to get involved in that. But that's my only interpretation. It's a strong signal to voters that we recognize we've made a mistake. It's a mea culpa. That's my interpretation of it.
So let me ask you about that, because I wonder, the politics around population and the stresses it has created on the housing market and other things. A lot of those are problems the federal government, while it's getting the blame, it can't build houses and cut red tape at the municipal level or force provincial governments to spend more on health care. This is its only way to deal with it in a big way, like we saw with the cuts in the student visas. So is it a consequence of like those other problems not being dealt with at the lower orders of government, that their ambitious plan just didn't have a foundation to absorb it, so now they have to reverse course?
So, David, if you're asking me, I mean, I think what we're missing in all this discussion is that the growth in immigration was a key pillar of the Liberal government's policy agenda when they were elected in 2015. This isn't something that's post-pandemic. The increase in population started, the growth increase started in 2016. The government was well aware then that Canada struggles with capital investments, whether that's housing, whether it's machinery and equipment and factories, whether it's the healthcare system, whether it's public transportation systems. Canada is not very good at building stuff. We know that capital was not growing as fast as the population even before 2015. So I would say to the federal government, why did you think that juicing the economy with more labor was going to help economic growth? They're not responsible for housing investment or even most of the business investment that happens. But surely they should have realized the solution isn't just to add a whole bunch more people to the population.
Okay, that's a really good point. And so, Rebecca, on that point, we've heard, though, from some provinces already that, like, hey, you're cutting the economic immigrant class, and we need those people to run our long-term care centers, to work in healthcare, to build these houses that we need because we have shortages there. I mean, are they getting, it's still 60% of the total number, but it's a percentage of a smaller base. So are they getting the mix right in the way they're reducing things? Because some of the smaller provinces in particular are pretty worried about this.
Well, quite frankly, there really wasn't enough in the plan to give us that confidence that it was going to be more targeted. So you're right, they bring up a few percentage points the share of economic permanent residents, but they give us no sense of how exactly targeted that will be, because we already know, and Mikhail knows this from his very thoughtful work, that even that those streams are not particularly well targeted. So overall, I think there is a risk there. But I think the bigger risk also is that with these numbers, they say they're going to stall population growth. We're likely to actually see a contraction of Canada's labor force over the next 2 years. And so if you think typically the labor force is growing, roughly about 1% on average a year, there is this demand for labor supply that where businesses are going to go through this challenging period where not only are they not, is there not a growing labor supply, there's actually a contraction. And the numbers in the labor force right now are about over 1 million, 1.1 million temporary workers that are in jobs now across the country that we don't quite know yet how the attrition of the non-permanent categories are going to unfold. And the government is under pressure to make that happen, to see evidence pretty fast. And so, we're really waiting to see details just to see how disruptive it would be. But I think, again, this idea they've slammed on the brakes. They set a target back in March. In March, it was reasonable, but, they've lost a lot of runway and the numbers have climbed higher. So I think an economist would say they should have stretched out that target a little bit further in terms of bringing the NPR number down in the country. But, it's really a political decision when you set a target, the cost of backtracking from that.
So Rebecca, just on this labor force contraction that you're talking about, I mean, job shortages, wage pressures, upward wage pressures for employers, which is good for the workers, I guess, but you talked about this as disruption. I mean, what are some of the consequences? I have a degree in literature, so I'm going to ask you, because you're the expert on this. What are some of the knock-on consequences of that you see coming?
Well, I think in its simplistic, in its most simple form, GDP is a function of, hours work times productivity of those hours. So we may, if we cut those hours worked by shrinking the labor force, we'll get a bit of an offset on the productivity side, but not likely a full offset. So the net impact is, we're likely to have a bit of a dampening effect on GDP across the country. Now, the per capita numbers will pop, just pure math, but it's not... Right. Canadians on average aren't going to feel better off over these next 2 years. If anything, there are a lot of uncertainties. Businesses, if you think you're a business and you may lose some of your workforce, well, they have a couple of options. One, which the immigration minister hopes, is that they turn around and hire people that aren't currently employed within Canada. Mm-hmm. But, the economists would say, let's hope that they invest in, non-labor capital, in productive investment in, equipment, IT, and intellectual property. But a third option is just in the midst of all this uncertainty here, in the U.S., abroad, that businesses just pause. So we get a bit of a freeze and a loss in economic activity, and a loss of a kind of a shrinking labor supply. So big uncertainty. If any economist says for certain what is going to happen in terms of, is demand or supply going to be, a driving factor, we'll see what the details are.
Yeah, some people will say it with total confidence, but you should ignore them because there's a lot of uncertainty out there. So, but Mikhail Scooterud, I'm going to try to get you to be super precise now. Look, so much of the economic growth we've seen in this country has been fueled by population growth. And it's the sort of thing that has kind of kept us out of a recession coming out of COVID in some ways. It's contributed to it. When you talk about, a pause in business investment, a drop in GDP potentially, a tightening of the labor market, I mean, does that potentially signal a pretty negative economic trajectory for the country, or is the uncertainty just too much to know for sure?
There's a lot of uncertainty, but maybe I'm a little bit more optimistic than Rebecca. the investment will certainly be incentivized by these tighter labor markets. There is a huge incentive for businesses to figure out how to introduce new labor-saving technological changes in their workplaces, how to train their existing workers to be more productive, basically just how to get more out of your existing workforce. And then there'll be a lot more competition between employers for scarce workers. And I think that's all very good. That's certainly pushing in the right direction. I think the two caveats where I worry, and I mean, I do agree with Rebecca that I think there's a potential overcorrection here, and where I worry is just the time frame. It's the kind of the dynamics. Do business have enough time? When you see such, I mean, let's put this in perspective. We're going from 3.2% year-over-year population growth to minus 0.2%.
Yeah.
That's unheard of.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no precedent. There's no experiment that we can look at in the past to see what happens. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. But I think there will be much good that comes out of this. And I think there are parts of the population that will be better off. There's going to be people who are going to struggle. Basically, very quickly, David, the people who are going to feel the pain of this are the same people in population that really benefited from the huge growth.
Right.
Now they're going to feel the opposite. Yeah.
Right, yes, and already we're seeing some of the effects like in rental markets and student housing because of the cuts of temporary international students. So you do see pretty quick and immediate market corrections in certain sectors, but this is obviously a much larger scale. But Mikhail Scudero, just to stick with you, I wonder, the ramp up in numbers, now the ramp down in numbers across all of the different classes. One of the strengths of Canada's immigration system is that you could target these highly skilled, economically valuable workers and bring them in. The rug's kind of getting pulled out from under the feet of some of them. So reputationally, does this make it harder for Canada to compete for those immigrants with other countries once whatever the fallout of the next couple of years has settled and they try to go back to normal? Is it a reputational hit for people who might be looking at Canada from this?
David, I dare say I've probably been the most critical, at least academic economist, but I might even say the most critical economist in the country on this government's immigration policy. And I truly am a nonpartisan person. But I mean, the way this government has taken immigration policy is really concerning to me. And I think that the number one reason is precisely what you got at. My main concern was not really about the numbers. Sure, they exploded, but I was concerned long before they exploded. And what I was concerned about is that what we have been seeing, and this is we were asked about this. I was part of a group that was asked about this from Minister McCallum back in 2016, whether the Liberal government should move away from a system of skilled immigration towards a system that's much more focused on meeting current labor market needs that tend to be in lower skilled occupations. They asked us that in 2016. We advised against it. We wrote up a report and advised against it. That report was buried. I recently provided to Minister Miller. I'm quite sure he'd never seen it. So that's a problem when you're ignoring all the economists. And I think what I'm worried about now is labor markets are going to tighten. We're going to end up in another labor shortage crisis. And it's even going to push us further in that direction of being obsessed about current labor market needs when really the potential of immigration lies in raising the average skills and human capital of the population.
So Rebecca Young, just to give you the last word on this, I know there's a lot of uncertainty and we don't know how the ripple effects of this are going to be, but what are you watching for next on this to get a sense of the consequences of this choice for the economy and for the country?
Well, I think, first of all, details on whether it's credible or not. It's such an aggressive pace with potential for negative implications. Will they actually be able to execute? So as forecasters, it's very challenging to even figure out now what population profile should we be looking at. And you can imagine for, cities and provinces in particular, how do you plan for this uncertainty? So in the near term, that's what we're looking for. Over the medium term, though, to get to Mikhail's point, the productivity side of the equation is missing from the puzzle. We need an immigration system that is grounded in the idea of, through the economic stream, how do we make sure we're really, complementing that population growth with business investment that matches the ambition.
I always appreciate talking to very smart people who know things. So thank you for spending part of your Friday with me. Rebecca Young with Scotiabank and Mikhail Scudero from the University of Waterloo. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you.
Well, another provincial election could begin before we see the end of the one in British Columbia. So what province could be next to head to the polls? Find out after this break.